May it please the court. Opposing counsel. Members of the jury. My name is Christine Pattison, and I represent the defendant, Mismo Fire Insurance Company. Desperation. We are here today because a desperate man hired a dangerous man. But before we get into all that, let us rewind to where everything started. Arthur Jackson is the president and owner of Flinders Aluminum Fabrication Corporation. This was his company, one that he had built from the ground up, one that had survived for almost 10 years. But then, in 2010, the company hit a wall and had over $500,000 in losses. And it didn't get any better. In 2011, in the first 9 months alone, there was an additional $500,000 in losses. Arthur Jackson's company was quickly and painfully dying. In fact, you will hear today how Arthur Jackson went to his employee and told her that if he did not get a new client by the end of 2011, his company would not survive. But this wasn't the only problem looming over Arthur Jackson's head. There was a $400,000 loan due November 28, 2011. A loan that Arthur Jackson had personally guaranteed. This seems like an impossible amount for a company that had just lost over $1 million in less than 2 years. You will hear today how Arthur Jackson went to the bank, tried to renegotiate, tried to refinance, but his pleas were swiftly refused. Getting a little more desperate, Arthur Jackson went to his wife and begged her for a $100,000 loan. But just like the bank, she denied him. Arthur Jackson was quickly becoming a desperate man. Looking for any way to crawl out of debt, Arthur Jackson hired Sonia Peterson, a woman who reached out to him and told him that she could help him with his struggling business. But how was she going to do that? You will hear today how she went to Arthur Jackson with a solution. Told him to hire a man she used to work with, a man named George Avery, a man she said would really light up his business. So Arthur Jackson met with him. And on that same day he met with him, hired him on the spot. Within hours of meeting George Avery, Arthur Jackson handed him a $5,000 check and a key to his plant. Handed him a key to his company. But who was George Avery? You will hear today how George Avery had recently worked at 2 other manufacturing plants, Fast Meat Packing and Ufank Company. Within weeks of being hired at each one of these plants, each plant burned to the ground. Within weeks. But still, you will also hear how George Avery was being investigated for arson at each one of these plants. But still, Arthur Jackson hired George Avery, despite the fact his educational background was false, his credentials were false, and he did not have the formal training to do the job he was hired to do. Or did he do the job he was hired to do? Within weeks of hiring George Avery, Flinders Aluminum Fabrication Corporation burned to the ground. But not before Arthur Jackson increased the fire insurance coverage. A desperate man hired a dangerous man. You will hear today today how all 3 fires had eerily similar characteristics. All 3 fires were started with hydrochloric acid. All 3 had the same smoke color, the same flame color, and the same reaction to water. The only difference between the Flinders fire and the other 2 was that George Avery was found among the ashes, dead. A desperate man hired a dangerous man. Now, members of the jury, it is up to the defense to prove to you, by a preponderance of evidence, that Arthur Jackson committed arson. The burden of proof rests on our side of the courtroom. We have to prove to you that it is more likely than not that Arthur Jackson set fire to his own plant. We will both present our cases, and I will come back up here and give you one last argument before I ask you to find that my client, Mismo Fire Insurance Company, not be held liable for the damages that Arthur Jackson willfully and intentionally caused. Members of the jury, as this case proceeds, I want you to remember just one thing. This all started when a desperate man hired a dangerous man. Thank you.